Being a perfectionist is lonely, lonely work. And I don't think we talk enough about how isolating perfectionism can be. So we're going to go there today. Loneliness is not about being by yourself. You can be in a room full of people or sitting on the couch next to your boo and still feel lonely. Likewise, you could spend the entire day alone without once feeling lonely. Being by yourself isn't enough to create the feeling of loneliness, and being with other people isn't enough to stop it. Because loneliness isn't about proximity to other people. So, what is it about? Well, whatever it is, we know that perfectionists, recovering perfectionists, and people with perfectionist tendencies experience the feeling of loneliness more often. There's a correlation between perfectionism and loneliness. And while recovering from perfectionism might be a lifelong journey for some of us, sometimes we can take a shortcut to change our feelings a bit faster. And so today, I want to offer you a different perspective on loneliness and a simple strategy that you can use to fight back against loneliness when it's a side effect of perfectionism. It's going to be so good and so helpful to so many of you. I cannot wait to dig in. Ready? Let's go. Good day, good people. Welcome back to episode 96 of the Life Edit Project podcast. It's me, your girl, your favorite life coach and podcast host, Coach Elizabeth. And as always, I'm super glad that you're here rocking with me. You could be spending your time doing anything, listening to anyone yap. And so I appreciate the fact that you're here with me. If you're new around here, you should know that I am a professional life coach and I help recovering perfectionists have better relationships with the people that they care about, including themselves. I talk about a lot of different aspects of perfectionism here on this podcast. I talk about what perfectionism is, all of the sneaky little ways that it can show up and affect our lives, and I offer lots of tips and strategies that you can use to break free from your perfectionist habits and mindset. I also talk quite a bit about what perfectionism can look like in the context of different types of relationships, because it can affect different relationships. It can affect your marriage or romantic partnerships, your friendships, your career, your family dynamic, and of course it shows up in our relationships with ourselves, impacting our self-esteem and confidence, our productivity, our health, and so much more. The common thread to all of this is that perfectionism makes relationships harder. And when relationships are hard, loneliness creeps in. And loneliness kind of sucks. Yeah, I know loneliness is a part of life and we won't always be able to avoid it. But let's not take on more loneliness than we have to, okay? Before we go any further in this episode, let's ground the conversation and get on the same page. That means it's time for another Coach Elizabeth definition, which of course you will find in absolutely nobody's dictionary because this is something that I made up myself. Okay, so what is loneliness? Loneliness is the type of isolation that happens in the absence of meaningful, authentic human connection. I'm going to say it again for the people in the back. And if you're writing notes, this is where you take out your pen and your paper and you start jotting things down. Loneliness is the type of isolation that happens in the absence of meaningful, authentic human connection. I want you to think, when was the last time that you felt lonely? I have felt lonely at a lot of different points in my life because I happen to be a recovering perfectionist. One of the loneliest moments of my life that I can remember was in those first few weeks after I had my daughter. So if you've been listening to the show for a while, then you know that I have one child, my daughter Naomi. She is, oh my gosh, she's turning 11 next month. Oh my God, I'm not ready. I just realized that. Sheesh. Okay. So I vividly remember feeling very lonely in the hospital just a few hours after giving birth. The hospital staff had taken my daughter to a special unit for a few hours of observation, and my husband had followed her. So he left me. And my mom, who had been in the delivery room with me while I was in labor, she left to go back to work because it was a weekday afternoon and she had a really important work meeting that evening. And my other family hadn't gotten to the hospital yet. And that was mainly because I did not want a bunch of people at the hospital while I was in labor. So, that was by design. But what I remember is that those first few hours before I got to hold my baby, I felt very, very lonely. I felt invisible and I felt disconnected and I felt like I didn't matter. Now, that particular feeling in that particular context, it only lasted a few hours, but then I had an 8-week maternity leave where I stayed at home with my daughter and I felt very lonely for a lot of that time too. My husband, he stayed home with me and the baby for the first 2 weeks of my maternity leave, but then after that he went back to work. And yeah, I had some other family come by pretty frequently in those first couple of weeks, but after about a month, it was just me and this newborn baby, and I wasn't even sure that this baby actually liked me. And so I remember there was this one day when one of my sisters had come over to help keep me company and help watch the baby. And I remember standing in my living room and kind of venting to her about how disappointed I was that my mom hadn't taken more time off work to sit with me and to help me like she had with my other sisters after they'd had their kids. And I felt like I just didn't have very much support. And I'll never forget that my sister said that she thought it was because I didn't really seem like a first-time mom. She commented that I just seemed to know what I was doing and that I didn't seem to need any help. So I've shared this story on the podcast before, but I usually talk about how it led me to this aha moment about making the struggle look effortless. But the flip side of that coin is that making the struggle look effortless created a level of isolation that stopped people from connecting with me. My perfectionism was giving off major "you can't sit with me" mean girl vibes, and I didn't even know it. And so people stayed away. Even though the thing that I wanted more than anything in that moment was for someone to see me and to see my struggle for what it was and to offer to just sit in the struggle with me without judgment to make it easier for me to find my way through. That's all I wanted, but that's exactly what my perfectionism prevented. And that's what perfectionism does. It erects walls in the places that we'd rather build bridges. It keeps people out and it pushes them away when all we really want to do is to connect, to know other people, and to be known for who we are. And it's important to know that this happens in a lot of different ways for perfectionists. I've talked at length in the past about the 5 different perfectionism personalities that I've identified, and each one of them breeds loneliness in a different way. The projector perfectionist tends to keep people at arm's length because anyone who gets too close puts their perfect image in jeopardy, right? It threatens the illusion of perfection. The planner perfectionist tends to make themselves unavailable to others because they're always planning and resisting spontaneity. The performer perfectionist can be seen as being super competitive, and that can be really alienating or intimidating to some people. The puppeteer perfectionist tends to be very controlling, and they can come across as being highly intolerant of anything that does not align to their version of perfection. And that can be interpreted as being very judgmental. And lots of people avoid relationships where they feel constantly judged and where they feel inadequate and like they can't measure up. And then finally, there's the pleaser perfectionist. And the pleaser perfectionist also repels connection, even though it seems counterintuitive. So the pleaser perfectionist, they tend to do a lot of people pleasing, and it's kind of a way of bribing people into connecting with them. But all of that people pleasing comes across as inauthentic. The pleaser perfectionist says yes to so many things that go against who they are that the connections that they build with other people aren't actually connections with who they are and with their true selves. And so that method of connection, it backfires. Now, this is not an exhaustive list of all the ways that perfectionism isolates us, but it does give you an idea of how effectively perfectionism creates isolation and loneliness. Now, hopefully, none of this seems too overwhelming. because I do want to offer up good news. You can counteract the loneliness that perfectionism creates, and I have a simple 3-part strategy to help you do it. We are going to nip it in the bud. And here, NIP is an acronym that helps you remember the 3 steps of this strategy. Ready? N is for notice. Notice when you feel lonely. So, like most techniques that I offer here on this podcast, this one starts with awareness because you can't change a problem that you don't know exists. So, the first step to noticing when you feel lonely is to tune into your feelings. I want you to get really good at differentiating loneliness from other negative feelings that you might have, like disappointment or unworthiness or even nostalgia, right? Loneliness is its own very specific feeling. Now, there might be different flavors to loneliness, and so I want you to practice identifying and noticing those too. It might come in the form of isolation or disconnection or even rejection, right? So whichever form of loneliness tends to resonate with you, I want you to practice noticing when it comes up. And so the notice in the NIP strategy here is to practice noticing the feeling, but then also naming the feeling when it comes up. The second step in this 3-part strategy is to inquire. Here, I want you to get curious about what's happening and why. The more you can learn about your loneliness, the easier it will be to counteract it. To inquire, you're just going to ask yourself a bunch of questions and see what comes up. See what kind of insights you can pull out. What was happening when the feeling of loneliness last came up? Is your loneliness part of a pattern or was it a one-time occurrence? Is the loneliness more of a passive feeling or is it an active feeling? Is it something that happened to you or is it something that you created through your own actions? The more detail and insight you can extract, the better and the more specific of a cure that you can apply. And then finally, the third step in this 3-part strategy is P, which stands for presence. If you want to create more authentic connections, you have to practice being present to connection instead of performing a role in your relationships. So in marriage, for example, you get to practice being present with your spouse instead of performing the duties of a spouse. If you're with a friend, be present with your friend instead of performing the role of the reliable BFF. Now, if you follow these 3 steps, notice when you feel lonely, inquire about that feeling, and practice presence over performance, you will end up creating more authentic connections with yourself and the people around you. And this is important because authentic human connection is the antidote to loneliness. Just remember, this antidote is more like a vitamin regimen and not a magic pill. So doing a little bit consistently over time is going to create a more lasting impact than trying to overhaul all of your relationships in a weekend and then putting them on autopilot. Baby steps still move you forward. Now, if you're tired of being a lonely perfectionist, I can help you build more authentic creations with the awesome humans around you. Just use the link that's in the show notes to book a call with me to sign up for one-on-one coaching with me. Otherwise, I will be back in your ears next week with another juicy episode. Now, listen, if you are a fan of this show or if you got something out of this episode, please share it with someone that you think might appreciate it because sharing is caring. So sending this link to someone is an easy way to deepen the connection that you have. All right, folks, that'll do it for this week. Thanks for rocking with me. And remember, imperfections can be the path to authentic, meaningful connections in all kinds of relationships. So stop hiding behind yours. All right? Peace.